Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone, both who have been following the site webinar before, but also the new ones that are joining us for the very first time. My name is Silvia Salini. I'm Climate Policy and Energy Officer at ICLEI Europe, and I will be accompanying you through this event of today, doing my best to facilitate the conversation, of course, including picking up questions and comments from you, from the participants. This webinar is organized by the Horizon 2020 project DECIDE, and together today we will dive into social and behavioral science in relation with energy communities and collective action. And I'm sure you won't be disappointed by the inputs from the great audience, the great speakers that we have, and audience as well. Before getting into it, just two quick notes. The first one, as you have seen, the workshop is recorded, and to already answer one of the most asked questions in webinar, yes, the recording will be available as well as the slides that you are going to see. This is going to be uploaded in the next day on the DECIDE website. And we would, of course, have a great lineup, but you are contributing to make this event interesting. So please make use of the chat box to put down your notes, your comments, and your suggestions, as well as questions. So a quick look into DECIDE before starting. DECIDE stands for Developing Energy Communities Through Informative and Collective Action. It is an Horizon 2020 project that started in 2020. And in the last year, we have been quite busy in looking into energy communities and collective energy action from many different angles. So we explored existing and innovative business models. We have been designing over 20 capacity building activities, both virtual and in person. We, of course, have been kept an eye on the policy development at European level, at the member states level regarding energy communities, and without forgetting the fact that, of course, those are initiatives that are implemented on the ground by people. So community engagement was one of the many angles that we have been taking. Everything in cooperation with the 7 pilots that we have across Europe, as well as the many initiatives that join along the way. And all those resources that we've been creating are available, and I will invite you very much to go and check the website, as well as the hubs that we have, the community hub and the knowledge hub, where all the resources are uploaded. Specifically today, we are going to go in the 2 last points that I mentioned, so community engagement and the work with the pilot project, because together with the experts, we are going to understand better some of the mechanisms that stands behind the reason why human beings take certain choices, and specifically with related to energy. This is because, unfortunately, the simple fact that something is convenient, that it makes sense, is not oftentimes a sufficient reason for people to really take action. And energy communities and collective actions are a perfect example of this. Despite the growing attention around those concepts, the many benefits, economic benefits, social benefits, and of course environmental benefits are not sufficient to really convince the greatest of us. So people are not yet queuing up for becoming part of an energy community or fighting to set up one. Some of those are, luckily, but still not at the pace and numbers that we will need to realize the energy transition. So together with the colleagues, we are going to look and unpack a little bit the psychological elements and hopefully get some tips to create a better communication and boost the uptake of energy community. We will have first 2 examples coming from the DECIDE project, and then 2 other examples coming from 2 sister projects that I thanks very much for joining us, the Renergetic project and the EC Square project. Then we will pause for a moment before for questions, of course, and asking and your comments. And we will move to a second part where, building on the inputs, we will look into communication and how actually communication can learn from the studies that have been shared. We will have a second moment of question and answer before wrapping up. We have a packed agenda, so with no further ado, I will then hand over to my colleagues, Mona Billing from the University of Zeeburg, who is going to present us the social norm intervention for technology acceptance. And right after, to Professor Florian Kuttner from the University of Zeeburg as well, who will tell us a little bit more about postcard experiment for the energy communities engagement. Mona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. In that case, I will try and share my screen. Can you tell me if you can see it?
We can.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Sylvia, for the introduction. And as you already mentioned, both Florian and I will now talk a bit about social and behavioral science for energy communities and collective actions. And we would like to present methods and results that we gathered from within DECIDE. First of all, to give you a little background, this is some research that we published last year. And what it shows you is the review that we did for the impact, social impact of energy communities in Europe. And what you can see here is on the end side is the framework of our definition of social impact that we developed within the project, with its different components, and also the dots that show the different types of research that we found. So what kind of evidence does exist? And what you can see in the next step, when I blend in what type of evidence it is, you can see that we do miss experimental evidence when it comes to energy communities and collective actions. And in that case, it is more, so this study was more focused on social impact, while the webinar today is a bit more on motivational processes that lie behind engagement and technology acceptance of people. But we experienced that the picture is quite similar in both cases, that mostly it's building on case studies and qualitative research, which of course bring a lot of value into the field, but also we wanted to, in our project, we decided to focus a bit more on doing quantitative research and experimental evidence. And I'm happy to show you some of the results from this research today. So the first thing that I want to show you is a study that we did, or multiple studies that we did in the context of technology acceptance. The context was a technology rollout of a retrofit technology from Thermovolt. So we did it together with a partner in the project in a social housing context. And we did multiple studies in these social housing companies. And the goal was to increase the acceptance of the technology, because normally the technology is given to the tenants for free because it's bought by the social housing company. So you would expect 100% acceptance rate. But in fact, the picture looked different, and we wanted to try out whether social processes that we investigated can increase the acceptance rate of the technology if it's given to the tenants for free. So it's a retrofit technology, as I said, built by Thermovolt. And so the study that we did is that we have the apartments in one social housing company, and we randomly put them into two groups. One group which gets the normal letter from Thermovolt telling them that the installation is going to be done, and one letter that is the same letter but adds a social norm intervention. And in the end, we look between these groups in the social housing context, do the rates of installation. So does the acceptance of the technology differ? Here you can see what the social norm looked like. It's more or less just a really basic descriptive social norm. So telling people, what are other people in my neighborhood here doing? And it was built on the fact that Thermovolt had a smaller rollout in the same social housing companies a year before. So we actually had data showing that other people are already using the technology and that they also saved money and energy through it. So this was the setup. We randomized in one study just by apartment blocks, and then in another study replicating the results, the apartments into these two groups, and then checked, does the social norm, just the information about what other people are doing, does it increase the acceptance rate of this retrofit technology in the social housing? And in the next slide, I will show you the results. So as you can see, so this is the pre-study where we only could randomize on apartment block level. So each block got one type of letter. And as you can see, we find a significant effect. So here you can see just for understanding, that's from 0 to 1, because it's showing the probability of taking up the technology. So either not taking it up as 0 or taking it up as 1, and the different groups. And as you can see already here in the graph, but it's also found on a statistical level, that there is a significant difference where the social norm intervention worked, and actually the uptake of the technology is higher in the social norm group. We replicated the study because in the first study, we were only able to randomize on apartment block level, while in the second study, we also wanted to randomize on apartment level. That means really that we all different apartments got the 2 different letters, right? So it was in 4 different apartment blocks. And here again, we could replicate the effect, which means that there was a significant main effect of the social norm intervention. You can also already see it again in the graph, but it's also a significant effect. There was an interaction with one of the housing blocks. That sounds a bit complicated, but more or less it only means that in one of the housing blocks, the acceptance rate was super high and there was no variance. So that was a bit messing with the effect. But if we take into account the different housing blocks and take into account this interaction, then we find again a significant main effect of social norms. So again, we have to say that the social norm intervention worked, and you can see very simple, just by an information about what other people do in their neighborhood, so people are similar with, that just this information on the letter already is enough to increase rates, as you can see in both of the studies. Maybe just as a note, because we also wanted to talk about we don't want to only talk about what works, but also what does not work. We did a third study, which tried out different social processes where we thought that might also maybe help or influence, which was one's trust and collective efficacy. We did this in one a bit bigger trial where we did a 2x2 design. So we tried out trust, which was building on the trust of communication model from Meyer and Davis, trying out transparent trust, so telling people what they can actually save through the technology and what might be a rebound effect. So that was a bit telling people, having transparent communication about the technology. And the other one that we tried was the collective efficacy manipulation, which means that maybe if there is a lack of personal efficacy, so I am not really making a difference, that either if we take it to the community level, to the collective level, that together we can make a difference. So putting up a sense of collective efficacy. We did not find results of these 2 interventions, though. We will maybe discuss more about this later, but basically what is the conclusion from these studies with ThermoVolt is that for this context in the social housing, the social norm intervention that I showed you at the very beginning, so a simple information about descriptive social norms, worked best in this context. And with that conclusion, I will hand over to my colleague Florian, who will tell you about our next experiment.
So I'll pick up the thread from Mona and basically complementing this with a 5 minute input on another experiment. So as you can see, we are now talking about the engagements, basically marketing of cooperative energy production and distribution. So it's another comms-based experiment where we modify and try different ways of communicating with potential prosumers here. And in this experiment, we partnered up with another partner, another pilot site. It's an Austrian energy cooperative. It's called Our Power. And what they basically do is provide a virtual marketplace for electricity that allows you to select recipients or providers of electricity on a very personal level. So you imagine you have an excess production of electricity on your house, and you want to sell it to someone specific, to a specific price. So this platform allows you to do that. And it is a cooperative, but it is a cooperative that lowers the entry level a lot in terms of hassle to join it. Okay, but they still lack prosumers and consumers that actually join their efforts. So we try to optimize their marketing materials in this case, for the prosumers to log into the platform, become part of the community and market their excess electricity. So what you can see here is one of the typical marketing materials that incorporates the basic gist of what the platform is: peer-to-peer marketing, direct and personalized. But of course, and if I can go on, yeah, thanks, Mona. Of course, if you see green technology marketing, another way of marketing it is typically on a more personal level, right? So it targets a pro-environmental attitude and theories like value, belief, norm theory by Stan behind that. And you would assume that prosumers already have a pretty high level of pro-environmental identity, and therefore appeals to climate protection would actually motivate them. However, you might then draw upon this, and that is what underlies our work, a more social identity approach to this, because in its essence, energy cooperatives are social endeavors, and every one of us individually will not suffice to achieve a change, but only together we can, right? And for example, in the SINP model by the Imo Fritsche and colleagues, this is very nicely illustrated, that the collective and the associated collective efficacy and norms that guide our behaviors might actually be more powerful in motivating behavior. And so you can see here, these three images illustrate the three different experimental conditions we created, and we sent out roughly 9,000 postcards with these pictures on it and a link to the platform to people from which we knew that they already had photovoltaic production installed on their houses. And what we measured was, one, whether they actually visited the website, and two, what marketeers would call the click-through rate, whether they actually engaged with the platform and signed up and requested to be part of the community. So this is what we find. We find that lowest response rates. Here you can see the percentage of participants. So we have about a 3% response rate, which is actually around what you would expect for such a postal marketing campaign. And what you see is that the environmental condition works worst. It's probably surprising, but then if you think about it, we are targeting people that already have committed quite some resources towards environmental protection. And so this doesn't actually add an extra motivator to them. So we can see here that the actual friends and the regions framing outperforms the climate framing. But then if we go on and look at the click-through rate, we see a nice pattern. We see that friends actually motivate to click on it, but the essence of the platform, so the cooperative sharing of energy, is actually mainly driven by regional identity framing, which in terms of SINP makes a lot of sense, because on a regional level, we can actually define what it is that we jointly want to achieve in terms of climate protection. You can see here another dependent variable, which is basically the duration with which people spent on the website, and it's basically replicating the fact that the interest is higher in terms of the length of information acquisition and websites visit in the regional framing condition. So that's it, another experiment here. And I think with that, it doesn't only the specific results is not what's important, not only what's important here, but what's also important here is that what marketeers, of course, know, you have to experiment, you have to try out different frames, you have to try to understand what your very specific target group, in this case, prosumers, but sometimes, as Mona said, just tenants in a social housing setting that don't have any involvement, what works best with them. And with that, I'll leave you and hand over to Sylvia again.
Thank you so much, both Mona and Florian, especially for this ending with an open question, which is already hitting to some points that we will probably taken up, especially the word target group is something that we will hear coming again. But now it's time then to listen to our second project beyond Decide that is contributing to this webinar. So it's my pleasure to invite Sonja Klingert from the University of Stuttgart, who will introduce us the heat demand response trial in Ghent from the Renergetic project. Sonja, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. I cannot at the moment. Something doesn't work. Mona, it worked before. Oh, now it works. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen now?
We do.
Okay, great. Have a pop-up here. First of all, I need to apologize. I still have a cold, so I hope I won't be too much of a hassle with coughing and so on. This is why I have to drink all the time. So the topic of my talk is to understand the acceptance of heat demand response, so of a specific use case that we are looking at in the context of the project Renergetic. So please give me a second to introduce this project of ours. Renergetic is about creating urban energy islands, and we are looking at all kinds of aspects. And this is the fun fact about the whole project, that we're working in a highly interdisciplinary way. So imagine we have a space, a geographically delineated area, but in an urban setting. So the Playmobil island is probably a little bit misleading. The ultimate goal is to increase self-sufficiency to the highest degree possible, self-sufficiency from local renewable energy sources, and looking into all energy vectors. So not only electricity, which is done very often traditionally, but also from the heat point of view and the interaction between those two. We are looking into society aspects of the whole thing, because what we all need to do is going more towards a responsibility for the energy that we are producing and consuming. We are looking into the psychological context, so the aim is to design a communication toolbox for us. We are looking into organization, so we are having renewable energy communities or energy communities with a less formal underpinning. Of course, economics needs to be taken care of, so we are aiming not to maximize the financial profit, but have profit as probably a minimum requirement so that people don't feel cheated, but it's not about maximizing or minimizing cost. And of course, whatever we do needs to be inside the regulationary framework, or at least what can be expected. So in the course of the project, what we did is we defined a set of different components that can work on this. And today we are looking into demand response. So the heat demand response use case that we defined for Renergetic is to temporarily increase or decrease the temperature of the room in response to a requirement from the heat supply side. And the specific context that we are looking in at the moment is that we have a company that is supplying waste heat for free, in the case that I'm looking at, in the early morning hours. It's a soap factory. The strategy is to have the central manager of our energy island to automatically preheat the floor heating in the very early morning hours, so we are talking about 5-ish, and later on shutting down the heating in the mornings between 8 and 10, where you normally have a peak, or that where this area, this local context normally has a peak, through manipulating the thermostats. And it is designed in a way that people can overrule. So just imagine your thermostats are being changed. You can look at them turning. Of course, what you need to have is the acceptance of the inhabitants. And this is where we carried through two demand response experiments. The first is a behavior experiment in the site New Docken, in the New Docks, which is a development area at Old Docks where you have mostly living quarters, but also some little shops and things like that. So in this case, we are trying to get the specific acceptance of people. And then we made a survey emulating the same, explaining the same use case to people and testing the YouChild technology acceptance model. So the experimental setup in Ghent, in our pilot site, was the so-called step wedge design. So the idea of this is that whatever intervention you have, you started only with a small group of people. Each of these rectangles are 8 households, and then each week you introduce more to the intervention. The reason is that we only had a small number of participants, and thus you can have at the same time a control group which is not extremely small, but of course it's diminishing week by week, because week by week you're introducing more people to the experiment. So and in week 4 we carried through a survey which measured acceptance of the whole thing, and things like coherence in social coherence in the area. So what was our intervention? First of all, we sent out individual live flyers. So each one had their own QR code to be scanned so that we could trace people. And we asked them to become part of this from a community point of view. And this was done on Thursdays, and on the Monday after, if nothing happens, we had the so-called Liebenjoker, where the guy who is operating the whole energy island was the manager and who's trusted by the people around. So it's a very nice, open-minded person. He phoned them in person and tried to convince them of the idea. And then the day after the intervention, the physical intervention, changing the floor heating was done. So what was the acceptance of the 48 original participants? 37 households in the end agreed to do this. But what is really interesting is that we only had about a third that did that via scanning the QR code. And more than 2/3 were attracted to the whole idea by the so-called Liebenjoker. We had actually, and this links a bit to what Mona said before about things going wrong in all these kinds of experimentation, and it's very often the details. We had also tried to test for the rebound effect, to understand if you agree generally to do this, later on you will turn up the heating a little bit more than normal, and maybe eating up the original effect on the reduction of the peak. And everything was very nicely set up, and we thought everything was running smoothly. And then in the end, it turned out that the monitoring didn't work out. So the result that we have, and the first result that we wanted to have, that was to find out something about how to make people agree to this. And the second result, the technical monitoring, work out. This is, by the way, why we are reiterating the same experiment this year. So I have another 3 very small slides on the heat demand survey experiment. Sylvia, do I still have 3 minutes?
Maybe if you can go to the key points, because we are about to pass over.
Okay, so we did something like that, asking the people about the technology acceptance of exactly this use case, but with paid participants. And this was how we explained the whole thing, with small little comics. And here we really tested the different influencing factors of this behavioral intervention, with which in this case was, would you agree to allowing this thermostat, the temperature adjustment to be made. And what we found was a very high influence on social norms. Again, picking up on the idea of Mona, you don't want to stick out, you want to behave as other people in your area do. We had a very high predictor from the performance expectancy. So we could understand, we could make it clear that this is technically sound and makes sense. We had also a prediction, but much smaller, from collective efficacy. So the idea of together we can reach a goal that works, but not as much as the social norms. Same for environmental attitude. And we had a contrary influence by autonomy concerns. So the more people said, they're interested in sort of taking decisions themselves and not letting others meddle with this, the more this influenced the intention of joining this idea in an adverse way. So what are the conclusions from these two experiments? Tested and personal relationship counts. Of course, if you use the wrong persons, this can backfire. I mean, if Putin would ask me to try out something, probably I would be skeptical. Framing it collectively definitely makes sense. You need to understand and then use the social norms in communication. And again, this links to the first talk. Don't miss the understanding part of the whole thing. As Florian said, the specific setting is always important and you need to try it out. And the technical soundness must be transparent. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A lot of inputs also from here, but this is not the last one. I see that there are already many questions coming in the chat. I invite you to continue while I hand over to the last presentation of today, which is the colleague Joanna Joanna Held from the University of Graz, which I thanks for coming to present the results of the EC Square project in measuring energy citizenship. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. So can you now see the presentation mode, or? Now it should be correct, right?
Exactly.
Okay, great. So I will talk about the energy citizenship scale that we have developed in the EC Square project. And for that, first I will shortly introduce the EC Square project. The project is called Energy Citizenship and Energy Communities for a Clean Energy Transition. So as the title already says, we're focusing on energy citizenship and energy communities, and we are looking at how to facilitate and strengthen energy citizenship. And the project involves 14 partners from 6 countries, out of which we have 3 academic partners from the disciplines of psychology, law, and economy. And as a first step, we have formulated an interdisciplinary and discipline-specific definitions of energy citizenship. And based on the interdisciplinary as well as on the psychological definition, we have then developed a psychological energy citizenship scale to measure the psychological manifestation of energy citizenship in individuals and in collectives. And with this newly developed scale, we will be able to test the effectiveness of energy citizenship for various sustainable energy related behaviors, for the clean energy transition in general, and also for broader policy goals. First, I will go into the psychological energy citizenship definition, because this definition is also what our scale is based on. So in the project, we came up with the definition that energy citizenship from a psychological perspective is people's belief that they as individuals and as collectives have the rights and responsibilities for a just and sustainable energy transition and the motivation to act upon those rights and responsibilities. So as you can see, we first look into individuals as well as into different collectives. Then we have the component of beliefs and of action motivation. And we also focus on rights and responsibilities. So we then came up with sort of a structure to make it more visual for us, this definition. So this you can see here on the right side. We first distinguish between an individual level and a collective level. We then distinguish between beliefs and action motivation, between rights and responsibilities, and on the lowest level between justice, sustainability, and transition aspects. And with the help of this structure, we then came up with an item pool of over 200 items, and we made sure to include several items per subcategory of the structure. And this large item pool, we then tested in a first pre-study with 50 people for the comprehensibility. And based on the results, we cut the item pool down to around 50 items. And these 50 items we then used again in our first study. And we then carried out factor analysis and cut down the final the item pool again to the final item selection, and we ended up with 2 9-item scales, one for the individual level and one for the collective level. Then in a second study, we confirmed the scale structure again with a confirmatory factor analysis, and in a third study, we then looked at the validity, we looked at divergent and convergent validity of the energy citizenship scale. And in the fourth study, we also validated it again in another nationality, in that case, in a Dutch sample. And here you can see the items for the individual level energy citizenship scale, and the items for the collective level scale are the same, only that we then focus on a collective group. And as you can see, we have items for rights, responsibilities, and action motivation. So the first items focus on rights. For example, as in the first item, I consider affordable, sustainable energy to be an important right. And then we have some items about responsibility, like I see it as my responsibility to help others participate in the sustainable energy transition, for example, by sharing my knowledge. And lastly, we also have items about the action motivation, like I am willing to play an active role in ensuring that no one is at a disadvantage during the sustainable energy transition. And with the help of this scale, we are now conducting different psychological studies to test whether energy citizenship is indeed effective to involve citizens in the energy transition. And yes, that is it from me now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Very interesting, especially because I think that for many, this concept of energy citizenship is not that familiar, and indeed this exercise is useful to make it a little bit more concrete. So we pause now for a second. We receive a lot of input. I see a very lively chat. Maybe one quick question from my side, since we just had this presentation from Joanna Held from the EC Square project. You've been indeed giving some example with those questions on how energy citizenship could look like. Could you please help us in understanding better, what do you see as a practical application of this kind that you have been working on? Could it be useful for organization, local governments, national governments, citizens group? How do you see this becoming used in practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like you said before, I think it also helps to just make the concept a little bit more present in people's minds to see these questions and what energy citizenship then entails. But I think that the primary use case for the energy citizenship scale would be in research, because until now, energy citizenship was not a concept that could be measured. And so with this scale, we have turned it into a measurable construct that can be used in different research questions. And in this way, we can then tell if energy citizenship is even a good tool to involve citizens in the energy transition or get them to join energy communities. So I think as a first step, we should research if energy citizenship is helpful. And if we then find out that energy citizenship is indeed helpful, then I think that a practical application could be to communicate that to different local governments or practice partners, and then we could come up with interventions that actually target energy citizenship in order to get people to join energy communities or improve different energy related behaviors.
Thank you so much. So work in progress for the moment. Yeah. And of course, looking forward to see the next development. I'm looking at the chat and rewinding a little bit to the first question that came our way. So I'm reading out loud the question that came from Stefan, who is responding to the first presentation delivered. And he said, I'd like to understand better the definition of collective action and what aspects about these initiatives include collective action for the customer. So I think this is a question to Mona. I put in the chat already a link to a paper that Decide developed to unpack a little bit the concept of collective action, but maybe Mona, you could take this up with reference to the experiment that you had with Thermovolt.
Yes, happy to do so. Thanks a lot for the question. It's a good question, actually. Happy to read it. I think it's in that case interesting that we do not understand it in that way that only behaviors that are done in a collective can be influenced by collective and social influences, right? But it's rather many decisions that you take individually in the end. You also individually decide whether you join an energy community or not. Especially private domain behaviors like heating are, of course, individual decisions. But still the collective setting of it, so understanding it, my individual behavior as part of a collective, doing the same behaviors together and also strengthening that sense of collective efficacy. So even if I'm just doing an individual behavior, if we do that individual behavior all together, then it will make a significant difference, right? So that is more the sense like we see it. That, and for the collective action, as Silvia already said, there's a really nice policy paper that was developed within Decide that is explaining the concept of collective action as we develop in the project. But I think that, and Florian, feel free to complement my comment, but I think that even if we're talking about individual behaviors, it's about the collective setting of individual behaviors.
To complement and comment, I'm not sure whether I'm answering the question actually, but I mean, one of the default modes of doing marketing is thinking about individuals and target groups, but then individual processes behind these target groups. And in a genuinely, but when we talk about energy, decentralized energy generation and consumption the way we need it to promote our energy transition, this will only work if people work together and coordinate. So that is a truth. And if you miss to communicate that by churning out technological devices that optimize on an individual level, you will always leave consumers with the feeling that some part of the story is missing in the communication. And in this age where everybody can kind of fact check and think about what actually works and what doesn't, I think it's extremely important to communicate truthfully. And part of the truth when we talk about the energy transition is that we have to do this together. At least that's our understanding in the project. And so that is what we want to communicate also in the marketing material. So we frame it, and you can do an action. You can install the smart meter at home or a smart heat control device. You can do that as an individual, but the very same action of installing it, you can also do as part of a social group. It just depends on how you define the action for yourself. And our conviction is, and we see the first data coming in, that it's actually for this setting more effective to frame it in a social way rather than as an individual way.
Thank you so much. And I think this somehow connects with another question. And I see also Sonia raising her hand before, which was a question coming from Stefan. It was asking about this independency. So what is the collective action role that plays into this setting? So Sonia, maybe you want to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. I mean, the idea of the energy island is not, as I wrote in the chat, not the autarky, right? It's like having a high level of self-sufficiency targeted at a geographically delineated area, because we know that we are using much more, everybody of us in the, let's say, Western world, that we are using much more of the ground than is, let's say, Europe, for instance. And if we think that back from, I mean, you probably all know the ecological footprint metric, right? So if we think that back, in the end, of course, we are trading, but in the end, we should be sort of relying on the area, on the space that we have for ourselves. So this is the original idea of positive energy districts or whatever, and the urban energy islands. But that doesn't relieve us, of course, of the responsibility to care for the rest of the world, be it the electricity grid, or be it injection into some bigger local heat network, for instance, which we are also looking at in the context of Renergetic. Regarding the collective aspect of energy islands or positive energy districts or whatever they are called, I mean, basically, we know that people work best then when they work together. I mean, this is what differentiates us from many, many other animals, that we are able to collaborate, and that we are also able to collaborate in an anonymous way. And the social norm interventions that have been reiterated not only by us, but by also a lot of different other projects, they show that people, as I said, they don't want to stick out. Everybody wants to be part of the group. So it's not far-fetched to say that whatever we do, let's try to do it together. And of course, in the end, if I change my behavior alone, just me, then I really won't have much of an impact. But if I know of my neighbor doing it and my friends, and then together we are forming a big sea of changes.
Which is a wonderful image, at least to me. And it's then indeed, if no one wants to stick out from the group, as you were saying, then the point is really maybe about how we do trigger this group to create this critical mass then is so attractive and appealing for other people that doesn't want to then stick out. And about triggers, I pick up the question that came as last in our chat box from Ali, and it's a question for Mona and Florian regarding the postcard experiment. And Mona mentioned that the studying the collective efficacy was not as important as other factors. Then in the Florian study, it concluded that the region condition got the best interaction rate and interest. So Ali is asking, is this a contradiction, or is due to different contexts? So maybe this is something to clarify. And I also take the opportunity to pull it with another question that was coming earlier from a colleague asking whether the effect of the regional identity would be, in your opinion, similar in other contexts, or is very like country specific or even regional specific? I don't know, between Mona and Florian. Yeah.
Andy, thanks for the question. We have been chatting back and forth, Mona and myself. Who answers? I'll give it a shot. And it's a little bit in line, perhaps I'm obsessed with that, but it is very technology specific, I would say. Coming back again to a smart thermostat in your room, right? That is a very personal, in your room kind of thing that is marketed that way. And a collective efficacy will probably play less of a role, because the thing itself, as it is framed as a physical entity, is just a very non-social element, right? You might change it design-wise, right? You could integrate a screen showing other people using the same thing, make it part of a game, whatever you think about it. But most of the devices we find that hook you up to a community kind of draw you back on this personal level of identification. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? It could be that the things that surround us and actually connect us to the system could be designed in a different way. And now again here, whenever we ask service, but Johanna can probably also say something about that. We do find repeatedly, and in the literature, the same thing, that collective efficacy is a very good predictor of intention and behavior in cooperating in collective energy actions. But there is this kind of, it's not only kind of region specific and context specific, it's also kind of technology specific. Some technologies are better framed in a collective way than others.
Thank you so much. And I see Mona raise her hand, and you called in also Joanna, so maybe afterwards I will ask her also to comment, but please, Mona, first.
Yes, thanks a lot for the question. I will also complement what Florian just said. Also, maybe because it seems contradictory, but I think that in the social identity framing that Florian mentioned in the postcard experiment, right, it's rather a broad social identity framing, and social identity processes include collective efficacy, but they also include social norms and the sense of social identification, right? So I would say that this is a more broad concept underlying this postcard, while in the interventions that we did, we differentiated between the different processes, right? We tried social norms, which worked, we tried collective efficacy, which did not work. But also, and that's also something I wanted to mention, I think we have been discussing about this as well, Sylvia, is we are still trying to figure out why these interventions did not work. And we also could consider, we would like to try out the intervention another time, because in that case, the information was on the second page and not on the first. So we could also imagine that maybe constraints of the experiment did actually lead to that effect. So it would be super interesting to try out maybe even a stronger intervention for collective efficacy another time in a similar setting. But thanks for the question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, many different elements that comes into the picture. And I don't know if Joanna wants to also comment on this point.
Yeah, I can also quickly talk about collective efficacy and how we integrated also in our scale, because as I have mentioned, we also have a collective level energy citizenship scale, because like it came up many times before now, collective action and also collective and group memberships are very important also in energy citizenship. So right now we are also working on a study and looking at how collective efficacy plays into it. And for that, we are planning on having a study where we vary the level that we're asking the questions for the groups. So for example, we have some people answering the energy citizenship scale on a very local level, and others who answer the same questions on an EU level. And we assume that due to collective efficacy, the EU will probably have like a stronger energy citizenship for the people that answer the questions in an EU context because of collective efficacy. We are still working on these studies, so I can't say if it's actually the case or not, but this is something we are also trying to look into right now.
Thank you so much. Let's keep then an eye on the work that colleagues Joanna Held and EC Square are doing, as well as the ones that of course are from the other project. So I would then close here this first moment of questions. It's not the last one, so you can keep on reflecting a little bit on the many inputs, but we slowly move then to the second part. We heard a lot about communication, slogan, the way to frame things, and the way to present, the stakeholder groups, the way to target audiences. And this is very much the daily bread of someone that works in communication. So it's my pleasure to invite the colleague to take stage for the second part of this webinar that will look into how to build an aware communication, keep bearing in mind all these inputs that have been just delivered. So Valeria Eyring, who is a communication expert at ICLEI Europe, will introduce us to this topic. Valeria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Silvia. I'm going to share my presentation now with everyone. I hope you can see it. So let's dive into these waters that are a little bit less technical, but also interesting for everyone, I suppose. So the colleagues have been saying, you know, how important it is to target the communication, to target it to the audience that we're trying to reach, taking into account the kind of organization that that is speaking, etc. Right now, I decided to focus on social media. Why did I do that? Because social media is a powerful tool, and we need actually to learn how to use it in our favor, not just to install these thermometers that Florian was saying, but actually to build a collective activity altogether. So, and social media is the perfect way of doing so. Here I just left a couple of parameters of things that should be included in a comm strategy that I think that's super relevant for everyone out there thinking, okay, what do I do to reach my audience? Okay, this is the kind of things that you need to think about when developing the proper strategy. So why is social media relevant? So the European Commission ran statistics in 2021 based on some studies that they did a few months earlier to these results. And as you can see, 57% of the population in the European Union between 16 and 75 years old are using social media, right? This includes all kinds of social media. This includes Facebook, this includes Twitter, this includes TikTok, right? As you can see here, the younger generations between 16 and 24, they are the ones that are using that the most. They are around 87% of the population, and going from Italy, who are super active, to Denmark, who are even more active, right? And then we see that the elderly population, which are actually not that old, they're actually what we consider baby boomers, are actually quite active in northern countries, but not so much, let's say, in Croatia. But the question is, what are enterprises doing, right? Are enterprises using social media? Well, they are. In some countries, they're using it more. In some others, they're using it less. There's a huge list of how much they're doing, but the question is always, okay, what kind of companies are using social media? What kind of companies are doing what? And as you can see here, large enterprises are much more active. Of course, they have a different budget, they have different structure, they have the talent to outsource sometimes these kind of communications, to give it to agencies that actually specialize into communicating to their target group. So you can expect a lot from a big company, but you can also expect quite a lot from smaller companies. Why? Because they can build a sense of community. And that's how you do it when you actually use social media in your favor. So the question is, what social media platforms are Europeans using? So this is the thing. Facebook is still the most popular platform in Europe. Everyone is using Facebook. The younger generations prefer Instagram instead, and the really young generations are going to TikTok. Why is that? There's a simple, like, non-written rule that young people run to a different platform once their aunt or their grandma asks them to become their friends. They don't want to share certain information with their family members. that they do like to share with their close friends. So that's why the elder population is still staying in Facebook, and the younger people are going to TikTok. LinkedIn, for example, is a whole different group, and Twitter, of course, it's has a different target groups, but we are going to go into each one of them separately. What are they doing them for? I mean, most, like Germany and France, people there are super fond of sending private messages on social media using all kind of platforms, Facebook or Instagram, for example, while like people in Spain or Italy, they prefer to just scroll and like. That's what they like to do the most. Other people prefer to comment or to post something, but that's something that happens more, let's say, in LinkedIn or in private groups in Facebook, where they're super popular. And reading news articles, and we should not underestimate the power of news in social media. It's incredible the amount of people who actually only inform themselves using social media, which is kind of dangerous, but we have seen the result of that also in elections in big countries and also in small developing countries. And last but not least, cooking purposes. People like to share recipes. It's fun, but yeah, the question for energy communities and collective actions would be like, well, how do you jump in that wave, yourself that wave of using cooking into your purpose, and maybe share some content that would be about how to prepare your favorite recipe using less energy that your grandma used to do it, right? Maybe with other tools, or, you know, with more modern equipment at home. So let's jump in a very overview of what it's one of the most popular social medias are about. So here I left some of the kind of posts that you can share there, and what kind of demographics, population are using it. So right now in Twitter, most of the people using that are people who are actually educated, they say, right? Wealthy, that's a word Twitter likes to use. I'm not so sure about that kind of gentrification. And they say always that is for people who are actually very active in terms of workforce. It's super powerful to disseminate news, discussions, you know, to conduct polls. It's used a lot by TV shows, political TV shows, to actually see what their audience are kind of liking at the moment, and the right moment. And it's much better than using the traditional, you know, rating points that they use on TV. Dissemination purposes for Horizon 2020 projects, super great platform. We use it all the time. And here I left also some insider tips on how to reach these 180 characters that we should use when writing the proper tweet. And that's it, using emojis, shorten the URLs that you're adding there, and always asking people to react to that, you know, to follow, to read another article. Just writing something up in there for nothing at all, that only works if you are a powerful influencer. If you are a John Doe, doesn't work. So now let's jump to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is mostly used by professionals between 45 and 55 years old. While preparing for this presentation, I read a very interesting stat that said that one professional was being hired through LinkedIn every 3 seconds around the world. So this is a very powerful mechanism to actually recruit the perfect colleague that you are looking for. Go there, look for the profile, actually build a community of professionals who are actually working on the same kind of field, share proper information with them, interesting information with them, engage in conversations, and also get in touch with other businesses. It's very important that you know what your friendly competitors, and sometimes not so friendly, are doing. You can do it by publishing posts, articles, sharing documents, as we have seen with our colleagues and their fantastic scientific papers, or conducting polls as well. And also, why not, promoting events as we do with the Decide project. Now we're going to jump to Facebook. And it took Facebook quite some time to actually add that thumb down, but it's a very powerful one. And that's how people actually started this cancellation culture, which is kind of toxic, but it's still there. And it's very important that we know that the people who are using Facebook right now are actually mostly baby boomers, as I said, in Europe. In other countries, there are still younger generations, or maybe in Eastern Europe, you can say that people between 25 and 34 are still using Facebook quite actively to share their pictures, to do carousels, to do stories, to do live broadcasts for events. For example, we have seen it quite so much in events that are that also connected with this European horizon field, and also to share text. But most of the content is about sharing information and to connect with the people that they like the most. So again, this sense of building a community. My insider tip for everyone out there working in an organization or like in an energy community is to create a Facebook business page instead of using a regular user Facebook page, just because you are going to struggle trying to have this organic reach that you are trying to aim, and also because the stats that you have access to using the business page are much rich than those for a regular user. Then we go to Instagram, and Instagram and Facebook are part of the same holding group, which is called Meta. And they have one particular nice element, which is that the fact that once you share something on one platform, the other one asks you if you want to share that as well. So actually, if you don't have too much content, or you think that you are running out of time, it's actually quite good that you can share the same story in one platform or the other, for example, to reach double the amount of people, because these target groups not always overlap. So here in Facebook, you have the photos, and that's how Instagram started, with people sharing their pictures. But you also have stories and reels, which are now the most popular element in Instagram. If you don't do videos, you are out of Instagram. Nobody's going to follow you. Nobody's going to see you. And I said here that demographics is mostly based for millennials, for people who are born in the last, I don't know, 40 years, no more than that. If you're trying to reach elderly generations, they are not there. And last but not least, and this is the one that everyone thinks everyone can do, TikTok, only because we see our kids, our nephews and nieces dancing in front of the camera, thinking, oh, everyone can do it. Well, it's not that simple. They have a special talent. They were born with a phone in their hands. So this is not how companies should communicate. It's amazing. It's a very powerful element if you are, let's say, a consumer company. Let's say, I don't want to name a brand, but like a sports brand, or if you are like a fast food chain, that's also quite good. But if you are an energy community, you're only going to reach the population between 16 and 24 years old. And TikTok is definitely not for kids, and it's definitely not for all the generations, because the moment kids notice that their grandma is following them, they're going to run out of that. So it depends on which kind of target group you are trying to reach, what kind of platform you should be using. Here are this is important only for the purpose of sharing this presentation later on our website, so you can consult it whenever you want. But here are some important tips on, for example, image dimensions, character counts, how often should you post or not, how does the algorithm work. So take a look at that later. And here's also some tips on how to have the best practices in social media, how to conduct yourself with the 5 stars. And that's actually very easy. Always use accurate information, descriptions, active links. Ask people to go somewhere else. This can be the perfect chance for someone to visit your website, to actually get the longer content that you want them to read, to engage in a campaign, to, I don't know, become an energy community, to sign up for something. This is the place, so don't miss that opportunity. When do people communicate? Where here are the perfect hours. Don't do it on Fridays. They're never a good day to reach out to people. They have their minds elsewhere. And how this is also really good to engage with your community, as I said. So use popular or relevant hashtags, not only worldwide, but also to your community, to the area where you are, to the target group that you are actually trying to reach, and use powerful content visually. And this is something that we see quite often. People just copy pasting pictures from the internet. That's an absolute no-go. Photographers have proper intellectual property rights, so we should respect them. And as you can see in my presentation, next to each picture, I decided to quote who is the author and where is that I got it from. That's the easy way to do it. And that way you are not violating any right. Otherwise it's plagiarism. And plan ahead, plan your campaigns, activate your activities, see what day is important, what time of the year is important for your community, and engage with them in that way. Use the most of what we learned from Mona, Sonia, and Florian, and put it together into a powerful social media campaign. And this is my last slide, and I'm not kidding, how to use how to produce a very inclusive post. Check the language, use respectful text, check the hashtags, see who is using those hashtags and what they actually mean. Use respectful emojis, take care of the colors of the emojis. Sometimes they can be tricky. The images, as I say, they also have to be inclusive. They also have to be powerful. The colors, there are combinations of colors that are really threatful for people who are visually impaired. So take care and look at that. And also use captions in the videos. People who are not listening properly, or cannot listen at all, are actually going to profit from that experience. So that's it from now. I try to go as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valeria. That was the deepest dive I ever had in social media, I think. And now I'm not sure about the colleagues, but I'm really thinking about my posts and how I did design it. And yeah, well, thank you for the suggestion. Indeed, very, very useful. And it's great when we start to look at social media not just as on the surface as something funny that takes our time, that keeps us busy. We really do a surgery and look into it as how it works. It's incredible how complex it is, really. Maybe one question that I will have for you right away. You have been mentioning the importance of the audience for each one of those social media. You have been pinning down which are the ages, sometimes even the countries. So stakeholders are really something that, for the perspective of someone that is building up a communication campaign, needs to be clear. And my question to you is, do you think this is a task that is actually considered? And would you have some tips to do that? Because my impression is that oftentimes people do build their page, their profile, and then start to create content, not really reflecting on who are the people that they want to reach out to.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes we just decide which are our general target core messages that we want to put out there, but sometimes we also need to reflect on who are our secondary target groups, right? Or who are and how to communicate with them. This information sometimes regarding target groups in certain areas can be found, let's say, in websites from the European Commission, even though they're not super updated, but they're still there. Most of the information about we found about demographics for free online are from websites that take this information from US sources. And they not always reflect the reality of European communities, right? Especially Eastern Europe is not the same as Western Europe, and it's not the same as Southern you know, the Mediterranean area. Everything is very different. So my suggestion would be like, if colleagues are writing a communication strategy for their energy community, maybe it's very interesting to actually have in their teams a very experienced comms colleague that have tons of experience working in social media, and actually invest a little bit of money in some platforms that might give you this right information, these stats that we are looking for, right? To understand, okay, who is that we are reaching where, without trying to cross-cut any, as I said before, any GDPR issues. Don't buy databases. That's not the way we reach an organic reach, and it's not the right community you want to reach, right? Sometimes, for example, for a small energy communities, let's say, for example, in Germany, there are some Facebook groups that function incredible. They have like thousands of followers and really active followers. So maybe becoming also an active follower there, and also an active member more than a follower, and sharing information with these people there might be the right target group to reach, you know, because, for example, for energy communities, you don't need to talk to a young person in their 16 years old, because, well, maybe they will convince their parents to become part of an energy community, but it's mostly their parents you have to convince to take that leap, right? So this is your primary target group, not their kids, the people who actually have the pen in their hands to sign a contract, to join something greater.
Well, thank you so much. This is indeed also looking into the effectiveness of how a strategy is built, and as you mentioned, I mean, at the very beginning you showed the graph of the having big companies having, of course, more resources to invest, and small companies maybe having really to make a decision on where to go, because everything is not possible within the resources given. And I feel this could probably be the case for many energy communities of collective energy action that do rely on individual initiatives or small group of people. Most likely there wouldn't be a communication expert in those groups. So I feel that the presentation that you have been sharing was a very good starting point to start think about those elements. And I would like to go back actually and connect with the very first presentation from the colleagues Mona and Florian. In particular, the first experiment, the first test that you have been doing together with Thermovolt. Mona previously mentioned very briefly that the reason why some results might have been going in a specific way is because of the design of the letter, with the social intervention being on the second page. And I would like to then connect with what Valeria just presented and go back to the colleagues and ask a little bit more about this, and whether they would see in a different manner, how would they design this letter or this communication in the future?
Yes, I'm trying to pick up on this. So I think, as I said before, that's of course we don't know whether that is the reason why it did not have any significant results, right? So there was just thing that we discussed. What was also a difference between the two trials, because in the social norm trial, the information was more prominently placed on the first side. On the second trial, that was not possible, so it was put on the second side. That's just one thing that I think has to be considered very carefully when designing such trials, also field trials, where we know that it's not always the easiest thing to do, to actually do field trials. But that's something that we also learned from it, that in the end we had to discuss, okay, what could be the reasons that these did not have any results? Maybe it wasn't strong enough. Maybe also it didn't reach that far as we would like to, but also because it was maybe a design flatter. So I think it's really interesting to also connect it to what Valeria just said before, to how to communicate. And if you have a strong message, then how do you wrap up this message and really make sure that people, that it gets to people, definitely.
Thank you so much. And of course, if there is any question, please feel free to type it down in the chat. I see a comment, but it's complimenting and Valeria for the presentation, and looking forward to the development in terms of social media. One question that another question that comes to my mind is connected with the presentation from Sonia. We heard Valeria mentioning that social medias are also a way to inform themselves, and when hearing about the intervention done in Ghent by Renergetic, I was thinking, wow, I mean, heating and cooling, heating demand response is something that is not that easy to grasp. So I was wondering, how do you think the literacy impact in this experiment that you have been conducting? And maybe I would add, do you think that social media, you've been using QR codes to engage? Do you think and feel that social media could be another option?
I think it depends a lot on the communication means that is regularly chosen in the community. And in Ghent, what they do is they send out newsletters, and information about something going on was already in the newsletter, and they communicate via emails a lot. And this is why that was the matter of, or the way of communicating the interventions. Same with, they are on a personal level there, so they are telephoning, and that was the background of the Leven Joker. But we are also working on interactive, or what we call interactive platforms in Renergetic, which is the best way to communicate with people. And there, of course, we are thinking not probably of social media, but of extending the, they're not really using, and well, they have something that they have on a website where they monitor their own energy consumptions and what's going on the supply side. And we could, and we are, and that also has an app interface, obviously. And we are thinking of adding some intervention, you know, calling for help button there. So when there is an event, so now we do have a lot of electricity from the rooftop PV. Why don't you charge your car now, or things like that?
Okay, so it's more sizing the communication for punctual events in this case, and linked to something that is closely connected with the personal situation. Okay, thank you so much.
So if they had, for instance, WhatsApp group or something like that, we would communicate via that. So you have to link to what people are using.
Yeah, of course, looking for the people where they are, rather than trying them to convince to move to something different. And another element that indeed we have been now diving into social media specifically, but I think that this same discussion could be potentially extended to gamification, which was something that Florian have been mentioning before. I see that a colleague, a participant, have been putting in the chat also the reference to the games that we have been creating. And maybe I would just invite the colleagues, I don't know if again Mona or Florian, to just spend a few words on the target game, what we call, that have been designed within the CESA project, which is something available again on the website.
Yes, I'm happy to do so. I think you already posted the link in the chat. Maybe just for a bit of a context, what we developed this target game for originally was for a workshop in a small energy community in Germany, where we try to find a way on how to best interact with people on a low threshold, like that we haven't been interacting before, right? So we wanted to find out a bit more of motivations of people, of who they can imagine doing their energy transition with, right? So this game is designed more or less to find out priorities and find out what people, how people would imagine their own energy transition to be like what kind of role they see themselves in the energy transition. So the game is basically to use, it can be used in research, but it can also be used, for example, if you're facilitating workshops or getting in touch with from the municipality side with local citizens, because it is a very easy way how to ask specific questions. So it's really on a concrete level. The game is basically like a target, and it is asking 4 questions. So what could you imagine doing, which actions, what role do you see yourself in, what is motivating you to be part of the energy transition, and who can you imagine doing your energy transition with. And then you have all these icons and you can drop them on the target, and the closer to the middle they are, the more important they are to you. And you can also build little clusters. For example, I do see myself as an active participant who is doing it together with my neighbors or my best friends. And I could imagine doing, for example, having a collective PV, right? So that is something that you could do through the target, and it really is a very graphical way of showing it. It can easily be a starting point for discussions if you have the picture in the end. So yeah, I think you already sent the link. It's freely available. We developed it within our research group, and I think it's a nice starting point for any kind of workshop or discussions.
Yeah, a trigger for conversation, and I know that you've been developing also a nicer or more colorful, let's say, version for kids that are also have been tried out with great success. We are heading toward the end of this webinar. I'm just would like to turn to another for last question also to Joanna Held, that have been contributing from the EC Square project. Just to ask Joanna, you've been presenting this energy citizenship scale that would allow to identify the level of citizenship of an individual, going and linking it to the presentation from Valeria on communication and social media channel gamification. Do you see it possible? You've been mentioning earlier before that could be translated in something as a tool, as a platform. Do you see possible this to happen in one of those means?
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. We had something similar in our project already. We didn't have it on social media yet, but in our newsletter, we had a link to the scale where everyone could fill in the questions for themselves and then get a score in the end, and also see how it relates to other people. So if they scored really high compared to other people or really low. And I think this also included some kind of these gamification elements, because then people can compare how they scored compared to others and how well or how much of an energy citizen they are. Up until now, we did not have it on social media, I believe, and I wasn't until now too familiar with how these different platforms work for different audiences and everything. So I think that could be something that our team could look into again and also post it on social media. But yes, up until now, we had it in our newsletter, and that was also picked up well by the people who followed our newsletter.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It's great when also from the panelists benefit from each other's presentation. I guess this is a very, very interesting opportunity. I see that Goran has been commenting and presenting his experience, which sounds great, with kids raising awareness on energy efficiency. So thank you very much for sharing. We are about to close. I would like to thank everybody for the participation. Of course, the colleagues Valeria, Mona, and Florian from the Decide project, Sonia from Brennergetic, and Johanna from EC Square, as well as all the participants that have been following us for this hour and a half. As said, everything will be made available on the Decide website. This is not the last webinar that we are organizing, so I invite everyone to follow us in the social media that we have run with wisely by Valeria to know when the next one will come. One information that I can already share is that unfortunately Decide is going to its end, so we will have a final event happening in Brussels on the 19th of June. More information will be shared soon, and again, this is another reason to keep having an eye on our social media and website. So with that, we have been learning a lot on the mechanisms that stand behind. Not everything, there is no silver bullet, but a little bit about how collective efficacy works. Social norms are important and turn to be effective. There are different identities that we can pick upon. We have to have the right entry point. We've been also learning a bit more on what energy citizenship is, and diving really into the different social medias that are out there and the different stakeholder groups that make use of it. So I really hope that you leave this webinar with some ideas for the next communication that you will do around this topic, so that we hope to bring forward the energy transition together with the participation of how many people as possible. Thank you so much and have a great day ahead.
Bye.